If you want to know how to have the patients coming back to your clinic and choosing your clinic over the others in your area time after time, then you're going to want to watch this episode. Hello and welcome to today's episode. It's called Why Ongoing Learning Really Matters for Your Physio Practice. Now, as you know, us as physios, we really depend on the training and obviously the education that we had in university, but sometimes, right, in fact, there's quite a lot of practices still out there that's still relying on the education and the learnings that we had through university. In other words, not really keeping up with the trends and the research and the new ways of treating patients to really get better outcomes, right? As you can imagine, this has a lot of costs, and it is so very important if you want to be a profitable practice that attracts high quality patients, right, and has a potential to grow year on year, that this be one of the most important parts of the practice. So what we're going to be doing is going through a framework that you can actually put into your practice so that you have the best chance of making sure you're staying current in terms of how to treat your patients. All right, so let's get going. Now, the first thing I'm going to talk about is the costs of if you don't do that, if you don't stay up to date and current with the latest best practices. What are some of the costs? The obvious one is outdated practices. How many practices do you know out there that are still doing things the way 10, 15 years ago? Same way, they haven't really changed, all right? You don't want to be one of them. You want to make sure that you are the practice in your area that has a reputation of being ahead of the trends. And obviously, if you keep doing that, right, your patients will eventually find out that there are other practices that are practicing newer ways to get better outcomes. So as a result of it, you're going to have reducing in patient numbers. Quite obvious, isn't it? Right? And as a result of it, you're also going to have a disengaged team as well. A team, there's a saying, if you don't grow, you die, right? So in other words, if you don't really make progress towards what you're doing and getting better and making improvements, you're remaining stagnant. And anything that's remaining stagnant tends to decrease in energy and die as well. So if your staff isn't growing and they don't feel like they're part of a journey of increased delivery and increased care, they're going to be very disconnected and disengaged. They feel like, you know, it's very mundane, very routine, nothing exciting and new. So your team will become disengaged as well. Obviously, all of these things, it's no secret, you're going to have decrease in revenue and decrease in profitability, right? It is pretty astonishing that I still see quite a few practices out there that are still practicing the old ways. In other words, they're about 5-10 years behind. So you want to make sure that you're not that practice. Okay, so what are some of the benefits we have continuous learning? Well, effective treatments and patient satisfaction, exactly the opposite of stuff that we talked about before. You're going to have patients that are more confident and they know they can trust that coming to your practice that they are receiving the latest treatments and the best outcomes. They have that trust, right? And even if you don't get things right the first time around, they know, they have this confidence within them to realize that you are a practice that stays ahead of the curve, really trying to learn and really put those improvements into the practice. So that's something that they will know. As a result of it, you're going to have more effective treatments and more patient satisfaction as well, because they will know, right? And as a result of it, you're going to have more patients as well. Goes without saying, doesn't it? So if you have happier patients, that word gets around. You're going to get more Google reviews, online reviews, etc. That will attract you more patients. It's a big thing. But competitive edge, now I talked about, in terms of there's so many other practices out there that are still not being current in the way they treat. And there's quite a few of them. All you need to do is stay ahead, somewhat current, then you're already ahead of the curve. But obviously you want to go to that really elite level, ideally, and make sure that you're right on top of everything that's happening so you can treat your patients better to get better outcomes, okay? And as I talked about before, team morale and retention. So before we talked about disconnected team, what doesn't grow dies. The human spirit needs growth. Otherwise, they'll start to feel stagnated. So this way, they always feel like they're learning something and they're constantly growing, and therefore their satisfaction and their retention for your clinic will also improve. Okay, so how can all these things be done? Let's talk about some very, very simple things that can be put into your practice to make sure that this is happening on a regular basis. All right, we've got a few options here. Now, the first thing is regular training days. What I see work really, really well for practices is that every single week, they have in-services every single week where literally the entire practice shuts down for about 90 minutes, let's just say, or the therapist at least, and they get together for an in-service to learn about what has happened or particular topic for that week, all right? And they make it a concerted team effort. So regular training days, what I see work really well, like I mentioned, is weekly, all right? If you do fortnightly or something regular to make sure you have momentum in learning, it's a very important thing. Peer-to-peer learning. So this goes back to, if you had a chance to go through our previous episodes, there was a section on core values and core purpose, right? When you have a strong enough team that is very deeply connected, right, and they are there to support each other, if you're doing that well already, we have a fantastic base to have peer-to-peer learning, where your staff and your team will feel very comfortable to go to each other and to learn. All right. Therefore, the regular training days is it's like I said, once a week or once a fortnight. This happens all the time. It's something that's very, very important. So when it comes to peer-to-peer training or learning, what you want to do as a practice owner is make sure the connection within your team is very, very strong. That's where the purpose and the core values really come into play. Bringing experts, right? So there are lots of experts. Could be dry needling, could be SIJ, could be pregnancy, could be a headache, could be TMJ, could be whatever that is. Bringing an expert that is elite in that field or pretty high up or specialized in that field regularly, maybe a monthly, every 2 months, every quarter, whatever that is, bringing them in will give you a chance to see, chance to really learn from somebody who, ideally that's their bread and butter. If it's just a TMJ, that's what they treat all day, every day, TMJ. You'll get to learn a lot from especially areas that physios don't tend to see that much, perhaps, maybe TMJ, like I mentioned, pregnancy, that kind of thing, right? Staying ahead of health trends. Now, what I mean by this is just making sure that we have somebody in your clinic, right, that is always keeping an eye out for what is happening. What are the different courses that's happening? What are the different developments that's happening? How can we stay ahead of the latest, papers and articles and things like that that are the newest way to treat and to have better patient outcomes, all right? Having access to libraries, okay? And recording and cataloging. Now, what I mean by that is when you have regular training days, when you have experts, whenever you have an event, in fact, you should be thinking this for anything. Whenever you can record something, you should always do it and catalog it. For example, let's just say one of the training days that we did was on the lower back. All right, we ran a whole in-service on the lower back. All right, it could be lower back, and the importance of multifidus or something like that. Whatever that is, you catalog that, because that means anytime anyone wants to go ahead and look at that, they can do that 24/7. Obviously, you can put this in the, some sort of cloud, Google Drive, OneDrive, you name it, all that kind of thing, accessible so anyone can view it anytime. It's very important. And the more of these you have, obviously the larger catalog and the library you have, the faster your team learns as well, with a lot more diverse topics. Very, very big hack, that one. Okay, so those are some very simple ways to get things started. Remember, your aim with this is to stay ahead as a practice who gives confidence to your patients that you're on top of the latest treatment techniques. That's the most important part. So what are some action steps? Firstly, if you're not doing already, go ahead, schedule regular in-service days, all right? So if you're not doing any, start off maybe monthly or fortnightly. Start off monthly, it'll be easier, All right, to get some sort of flow, it needs to be at least monthly regular. You want to ideally have them every single week. All right. Now, what a lot of practices will think is that, stopping treatment for 90 minutes at a time, doesn't that actually waste a lot of revenue? Well, for that 90 minutes, yes. But the amount of value you get out of that 90 minutes will far outperform the 90 minutes of revenue that you lost. Because if you think about it, you're doing all the right things for your patients. All right. You're collectively growing a lot of knowledge and skill to get a lot more impact with every single session outside of that 90 minutes. So get the regular training service days. Rotating team member learning sessions, okay? So maybe this is a chance to help your team members grow as well. What I see work really well is that, we have a roster of staff members that take an in-service every single month, right? And it's their role, they pick a topic and it's their role, right? And what you really want is you will have team members that are really good at an area. All right, you want them to talk about that. That's one way of doing it, which I believe is the most effective way. And the other way is you give them a topic, right, and they have to go to the research. But unfortunately, with that path, you are not drawing on the things that they really want to do and like to do, and they're really good at doing. You really need to focus on what they're really good at doing. So that is something you can do. So you don't have to give them a topic. You can get them to talk about anything you want, what they truly enjoy treating. That's when you're getting the best in services as well, because they're really deeply passionate about that area. That's very important. All right, create a schedule for expert workshops. Like I mentioned, this is a part where you can really accelerate the amount of knowledge you gain in areas that can be unfamiliar to a typical physio practice. The example I came up with was TMJ, right? So, but the most important thing is you schedule these expert dates well in advance, a year in advance, because then you have to go and make sure you find somebody, all right? These are some of the things. Put this in your diary every single month, maybe at the end of the month or whatever that is that works for you. Expert comes in, and then obviously we need to go and find them. All right, create a member team responsible for outside information. I've talked about this before. This is somebody or a team in your practice to keep the eyes and the ears on the ground, with the latest papers, with the latest articles, with the latest trends, the latest courses, what's happening out there in the world of physio, right? So obviously the APA has quite a great few resources, but there's lots of other ways to keep in touch as well. So you need to have a dedicated team member who, once again, you'll find generally somebody in your team who will really love to learn more about a particular area, right? You just need to have somebody who likes that naturally and have them be responsible for that. That's very, very important. It keeps you current. Okay, using patient case studies in services. So we went back to in services. One of the very easy ways, if you run out of topics, really, is you should almost have one or two challenging patients, in a given weeks. It's almost a given. So we can talk about them. You really should talk about them, in fact, because nothing gets as live, as relevant as talking about a patient who's having trouble or it's a challenge to get the right outcome. So we definitely need to talk about that. The other thing is have an educational budget. So for you to have experts come in, all right, or any resources that you need, or maybe to access to the papers or the courses you need to create, things like that, you need to have a budget. Start small if you're not already doing it, and then build your way up from there. Right, so really use this as an avenue and a framework to really get your practice to be that practice that patients feel super confident in, that you're on top of the latest ways to treat and get the best outcomes. Hopefully that helps. If that has helped, head down to our website, physiomarketing.co. There's some great resources there. There's more articles like this that's going to be directly applicable to your practice as well. Have a read of them. Other than that, thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.